Okay. Let's take a moment to set our motivation for doing what we're doing here today. And we can think about how we want to engage with this topic of Tibetan debate as a way to broaden our minds, strengthen our logic and reasoning, deepen our understanding. And why do we want those things? Because those things are just tools, really. And we think so we don't want them as ends in themselves. We want them as tools to help us see things more clearly so that we can develop more compassion, so we can develop more loving kindness, and so we can develop a more and more correct understanding of what things are, how things work, and how things exist. So we can bring about the cessation of suffering, the maximization of happiness for all beings everywhere. So for that reason, we'll engage with learning these tools, and we'll check in now. Okay. Wait. Yeah, no? Yeah. Okay. Wait. Okay. I don't know what I think. Okay. Anyway, I can see it. That's what matters. So earlier today, I received an email from some anonymous party, which it touched my heart in a way, because like one way that I might summarize the email, it was a lovely, kind email, and asking a really important question. And I think the way I'd summarize the question is, can you please tell us what the hell is going on? And so I was thinking about how I might be able to do that, and I landed on the idea of doing a PowerPoint, which I think is what threw my monitor off for a spin for some reason, but a PowerPoint showing the beginning of a debate and breaking it down in terms of like what might be going through somebody's mind, that would make them respond in one way versus another, and so forth. So I'll hopefully share that with you guys. But before I do, I just wanted to ask if there were any specific, like any questions short of like, how do we do this? Like, what the heck is going on? Like any other particular questions? Okay. Also, I just want to acknowledge, I don't know what protocol is. I don't know like what the done thing is, but like I feel like I need to congratulate you guys in the UK for like a beautiful coronation yesterday. No, okay, sorry, no, I shouldn't say that. Yeah, I should say that. Oh no, oh my gosh. Okay, I think we have a topic for debate for the end when we practice.
I'll just be honest here, and I
yeah.
apologize to everyone around the world, because everyone has the right to their own view, and that's okay, and everybody's different. However, I know historically the royal family have done a lot. Like Queen Victoria did tons for Britain, and I think both Elizabeths did. However, I was only born in 79, so I I don't know anything about the royal family. I don't know what the royal family do. And I have like, Princess Diana died and everybody thought I was an evil person, right? Because I lost my mum when I was young, as did Harry and William, long story short. And so I totally empathized with Harry and William when that happened. However, I've never met Diana. I don't know Diana. It's not I didn't care. I thought, oh, that's so sad. I had compassion for them, but it didn't destroy me in the same way it destroyed other people.
Right.
And actually, in hindsight, that's been a really interesting attachment teaching, things like that. But yeah, I'm just like, I don't understand why everybody's crying. If someone else cries, oh my goodness, I'm in floods of tears. If someone cries in front of me or on a screen, but just everybody was so upset about this, and I thought, I don't get this. Have these people met Diana? Have they?
Sure. No, I understand. Yes. Yes. No, I thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. It's like one reads summaries of different people's views, but it's very nice to hear what somebody feels, and I'm sure there are different feelings even in this room. So I'm sorry. I apologize if I opened up a can of worms. From this side of the Atlantic, it's just so lovely. And it's just, I mean, my very ignorant outsider's view is like, oh, it must be so nice to have like a unifying symbol that we didn't have to vote for, so that we are not arguing about. And I already see my mistake. So, okay, sorry. All right. In any case, let me then try to share what I tried to do here. Can you guys see that? Yes. Yeah, okay, great. Now let me see if there's any magic I can do to try to be able to see. Aha, look at that. I can do it. I can see you guys and this at the same time, despite the computer's best efforts to prevent me. Okay. So yes, so let me, let me see, is this, okay, I think this should work. I threw this together in just a couple of hours, so please bear that in mind. So the first stage, when we start a debate, the first thing we need to do is we need to establish what is going to be the root thesis, right? So I just took this, the approach that I wrote this as if I'm the challenger. So when I say I'm referring to me as the challenger. I did it that way because I thought that the challenger's role is probably more challenging in the beginning, because as the defender, we just have to remember a few phrases. So to establish the root thesis, actually, maybe I'm not as clever as I thought I might be. Can I see you guys in this at the same time? Okay. So what do I want to find out? Now, of course, this could be anything, right? This could be whatever I want to debate about. So I'm just picking an example. So let's say I want to find out, does the defender believe that whales are fish, right? I want to know because whichever way they go, I'm going to debate them on that. So what are my options, for starting the debate? I'm the challenger, so I have to start the debate by saying something. So if I want to find out whether they believe that whales are fish, one of my options is to say, take the subject, whales, it follows that they are fish. And my other option is to say, take the subject, whales, it follows that they are not fish. Either way, it will get me to the same place, right? It's just however I want to phrase it to begin. So let's say that I choose to say, take the subject, whales, it follows that they are fish. So boom, that's what I say. So this is what I've just said. Take the subject, whales, it follows that they are fish. So now what are the defender's options, right? The defender's options are to either say, I accept, or to say why. Those are the only two options that the defender has, right? So let's say that they say, I accept. Okay. So what the defender has just accepted is the subject, whales, they are fish. They have just accepted this, right? That is now the root thesis. We've established the root thesis. This is the first thing that the first thing of substance that the defender has accepted. The subject, whales, they're fish. This is what we're going to be debating about. Have I lost anybody so far? Oh, very nice. So now we move on to stage two, right? Stage one is quick enough, right? Stage two is the debate proper. So, sorry, I need to keep moving things around a little bit. So what the defender has just accepted is that the subject, whales, they are fish. And what am I thinking on my end? I'm thinking whales are not fish, though. This is me, Gus, right? Whales are not fish. But hold on, though. What makes me say that? How do I know? Right? This is, again, this is the point of debate. Like I'm involved in this too, right? Well, because I know they're mammals, right? This is my thought process in my head. they're saying that whales are fish, but whales are not fish. Well, how do I know that? Well, because they're mammals, right? So really what I'm thinking is whales are not fish because they're mammals. This is like the formal version of the thought that I'm having. Is everybody still with me? Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be patronizing. I just want to make sure that I don't, right? Okay. So what are my options? My first option is to say to them, but basically to give them a reason to prove that they're wrong, right? So I would say the subject whales, it follows that they are not fish because they are mammals, right? This is taking my own thinking about the situation and putting it as a consequence to give them a reason to prove that they're wrong, right? My other option is to show an absurd consequence of what the defender has just accepted. So in this case would be to say the subject whales, it follows that they are not mammals because they are fish, right? Now I would say you have accepted the reason. Why? Because that is the root thesis that they've accepted. The subject whales, they are fish. You see? Like in other words, so they've said the subject whales, they are fish. So I can either say, no, 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 they're not fish because they're mammals, right? That's option one. Or I can say, oh, they're fish, huh? Well, in that case, they're not mammals because they're fish. I'm giving them an absurd consequence. And I'm saying you have accepted the reason because they have, meaning you have accepted the reason means you, in this case, that you've said that the subject whales, they are fish. Thoughts, questions, concerns at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Clara, you go.
No, I just wanted to clarify whether you would say that you have accepted the reason. You would actually kind of
I would say that out loud. Yeah, I would say that out loud.
Right.
Yeah. It's not so much like blah ha 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 as much as it is like remember, like check, you know? It's like warning. This is what we've established so far. Now they're always allowed to take back what they said. It's allowed, but I'm just giving them a warning that if you say something else, then you're changing what you originally said, right?
It's like signposting where you know what's been happening on a kind of meta level, right?
Exactly. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad we're doing this because everybody was like, we get it. And then this slide, everybody's like, wait. So I think we're pinpointing where the challenges lie. Okay. I honestly didn't see the order in which people raise their hands. So I'm just going to go across my screen. Okay. So Linda.
So at this point, if you go with option 2, the defender you haven't said anything about mammals yet, right? So this is sort of adding that your reasoning in there in a phrase of a statement.
Exactly. That's exactly right. In other words, you know, like internally, I'm like, what they just said is nonsense. Why? What? Like, why is it nonsense? Like, why aren't whales fish? Well, because they're mammals, right? That's my reasoning. So I'm going to use my reasoning to challenge them, right? So notice in both of these options, I'm introducing this idea of mammals that wasn't on the table before. In one option, I'm challenging what they like. One option, I'm kind of being like straight with them. I'm saying like, no, 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 you're wrong because whales are mammals. In the other option, I'm saying, well, let's take you at your word. Then this absurd consequence would follow that they're not mammals. Isla?
You're maybe going to go here, but I just wanted to check. So for somebody that's adamant that whales are fish, not because they've forgotten about mammals, but just because they're adamant that, so it's not a misconception, it's a wrong idea completely, then that won't be absurd to them. So therefore they'll just go, yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
But could you continue with further ones of those down the line to kind of then prove it?
That's exactly right. Yes, I think if it's enough of an answer, I think the answer is a resounding yes. That's the idea, right? I'm basically kind of checking and helping them check, like, what follows from what you're saying? What of that seems problematic to you? What doesn't seem problematic to you? If anything doesn't seem problematic to you and I think it's wrong, why do I think it's wrong? And that's how the whole thing develops. See? Who else had their hand up? No? Okay.
Wait.
Oh, Sheila.
So you could take this debate either way. I mean, you could actually, in a sense, try to prove that whales are fish. I mean, you could say they have fins, they live in the ocean. I mean, could you then try to prove the other?
So how can I put this? If I, Gus, am convinced that whales are not fish, right? Like, let's say if I'm convinced that whales are not fish and you're convinced that whales are fish, this debate is basically going to end with one of us convincing the other, right? It could also end with me as the challenger feeling stumped. Like, I still feel like whales are not fish, but I can't think of why. And then I have to go do my research and come back. But short of that, right? Short of that, it's going to end up with one of us convincing the other, really. Now, you as the defender, your only tools for convincing me basically are just answering my questions in very limited ways, but that can be very powerful. That can be very powerful. Yesterday, I was having like a very cute play debate with Nick, my husband, and I said, it follows blah, 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 blah. And he said, why? And I was like, like that happens. So, so if I'm right that whales are not fish, and if I'm clear on why, then this debate will never get us to prove that whales are fish. You see what I mean? But if I'm wrong, then it might. So hang on, let me go through it. See, I think maybe you can go through this twice, actually. The first time, we'll get a sense of it, and then we'll go through it a little bit more closely again. But I just didn't want to make sure I'm not ignoring anybody. Okay. So I actually have one more option. So remember, the defender has accepted the root thesis, the subject whales, they are fish. I think they're not because they're mammals. So one option is to give a reason to prove that they're wrong. Another option is to show an absurd consequence if what they're saying is right. But one other option I have is to find out why it is that they think what they think, right? So I could say the subject whales, they are fish because, you see what I mean? Like, in other words, I could prove them wrong. I could prove them wrong by directly telling them they're wrong and why. I could prove them wrong by showing them an unwanted consequence of what they're saying. Or I could explore more and say, like, what's your thinking here? Like, why is it that you believe this thing that whales are fish? Okay. So in this case, I'm choosing, I could go, there's no right or wrong. I could go any way, but just for the sake of the example, I have to choose one. I'm choosing to go with wanting to know more about why it is that they think that whales are fish. So I say to them, the subject whales, they are fish because. So this is what I just said, right? Now, what are the defender's options? The defender doesn't have any options in this case, right? By the rules of debate, they have to posit a reason to prove what they've just accepted. In this case, that whales are fish, if I ask them to. If they just accept something, I ask them why, that they don't have different things that they can say. They can only tell me why they think this. Now, of course, the reason that they give, there's no predetermined reason. It's whatever reason they have, right? So let's say the defender says, because they live in the ocean. I said, the subject whales, they are fish because, and they say, because they live in the ocean. Okay. So the defender has just implicitly posited a few things by saying that, right? They didn't say this out, implicitly just meaning like they didn't say it out loud, but here's what they're implying, right? They're implying that the subject whales, they live in the ocean, and they're implying that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily is a fish. Why can I tell you that they're implying that? Because they think that living in the ocean is a sufficient reason for proving that something is a fish. So they must think that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily is a fish, right? And they think that this proves that whales are fish, so they think that this pertains to whales. Anybody have any qualms at this point? Yes, Andrew.
Yeah. So I guess it's getting to the point of you're saying that they've implied whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. However, if I'd answered because they live in the ocean, I know we're just talking about fish in this case. So yeah, if you come back and say, well, a rock lives in the ocean, therefore you're I don't see that they're necessarily implying that whatever lives in the ocean.
If you're the defender and you believe what you just said out loud to me, then you wouldn't want to say live in the ocean is the reason that I know that they are fish. Because you're just saying to me that you yourself don't think that that's enough of a reason. Other things live in the ocean that aren't fish. So you wouldn't give me that reason. You see? It's the same as like, you know, like suppose somebody said to me, take the subject, a tomato. It follows that it is a vegetable. Somebody said that to me. And I said, I accept. So I'm accepting a tomato as a vegetable. They say, the subject, a tomato, it's a vegetable because, I wouldn't say because it's red, because that doesn't prove that it's a vegetable. I also wouldn't say because you can find it in a salad, because that doesn't prove that it's a vegetable. Croutons can be found in a salad, you know, and they're not, well, you know, whatever. Right? But you see what I mean? Linda?
I'll just keep going and see what happens. The word pervasion comes to mind on this, and direction. I think.
The word pervasion comes to mind. What? I'm sorry?
That, well, yeah, maybe the second round.
Okay, let's see. Okay. So they've accepted their root thesis is that whales are fish. I said whales are fish because, and they say because they live in the ocean, right? So they're saying whales live in the ocean. They're saying whatever lives in the ocean is a fish. Okay. So again, that's what they have implicitly posited. So now I need to make them explicitly accept these things for the record. We don't want to go by implications, right? I want to be, again, we're being honest. I want to be sure that they're clear that this is what they're really saying, that this is what they're really accepting, right? So I say the subject whales, it follows that they live in the ocean, right? I'm just spelling out what they implied. And logically they say, I accept, right? And then I say, oh, sorry. So now I can start keeping track for you guys. What else has the defender accepted so far besides the root thesis? They just accepted that the subject whales, they live in the ocean, right? The record shows that. So then I'm going to say it follows that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily is a fish, right? Now that's wrong, but that is what they meant. So logically they'll say, I accept, right? And so now they've accepted that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily are fish. We don't have to worry about is versus are, a, the, whatever. Like, okay. Now, it could happen, of course, like it's not like they're forced to accept it, because it could happen that they might go like, doh, you know, like you're right, that's not true, you know, and then we kind of just go back. But if they meant what they said, then they'll accept this stuff. And then this is where we stand so far. Okay. So now they've just explicitly accepted these two things. So what am I thinking? So they've accepted that whales live in the ocean. They've accepted that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily are fish. So what am I thinking? I'm thinking, well, okay, it's true that whales live in the ocean. I have no problem with that. But it's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. But hold on, though. What makes me say that? How do I know? Right? And I may think like, well, coral lives in the ocean and it's not a fish. Right? So to sum up what I'm thinking is it's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish, because coral lives in the ocean and it's not a fish. That's in my mind what's going on, right? So what are my options here? My options are to say it follows that it is not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish, because coral lives in the ocean and it's not a fish, right? This is kind of me giving them a reason to prove that they're wrong. So it's like me just playing it straight. Another option is to say the subject coral, it follows that they are fish because they live in the ocean, right? I'm showing an absurd consequence of what they've just accepted. Now, I would say you have accepted the pervasion, because if you look here, you can see my cursor. Yeah, if you look here, they have just stated that pervasion, that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily are fish. They're wrong, of course, but that's what they've done, right? And my third option is to say whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish because, again, I'm finding out why it is that they believe what they believe. Okay, Clara, I saw your hand up for a moment, or?
Yes. Forgotten what I wanted to say now.
It's okay.
The first option seems to be always the proving or saying directly that they're wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's never, the language doesn't ever suggest that. It's kind of very, it's not phrased directly like that, right?
Yeah, because like in the debate, it doesn't so much matter whether they're right or whether they're wrong. What matters is like what is the truth here? Like, what is it that we're getting at? What is it that we're saying? So, they just said whatever lives in the ocean is a fish. So it's not so much like, I want to prove you wrong. It's more like, no, whatever lives in the ocean is not a fish. That's what I want them to get. So I can either say it directly and tell them why, or I can say, well, if it were true that whatever lives in the ocean is a fish, then coral would be a fish. Or I can say, why do you think that whatever lives in the ocean is a fish?
It seems like the second, I'm just trying to put myself in the position of the challenger and where one would go. And I guess some of it depends on how well one knows the other person and what they might be thinking, right? But it seems to me that the most kind of, it seems like the second option is I can't even say why exactly, but it seems like the second one is the one that really points to the crux of the matter.
Yes.
I can't quite articulate.
No.
Why.
I think you're right. I think all three of these options are perfectly valid, right? They're all fair. And the second one is definitely the default preferred option in a debate. The simplest way forward in a debate is to show the unwanted consequences of what the other person is saying. That's the simplest way, right? When would you use option one instead? When you have some reason to think that if you say that, they'll immediately see the error of their ways, then you can just save time by saying, because if you say number two, the point is that eventually you'll want to come back and show them number one, but if you think like they'll get it very quickly, then you can just jump to number one. But as beginning debaters, we probably don't even want to do that. We want to play it all out, right? And number three, you could use number three for you can use any of these for any reasons, but when would I go to number three? Like one time I would go to number three is if I can't immediately think of an unwanted consequence to what they said. Like if they just said whatever lives in the ocean is a fish, I'm like, it doesn't sound right, but I don't know why. So I might say, why is it that what lives in the ocean is a fish? See what I mean? Like I'm fishing, no pun intended, I'm fishing for more of their reasoning so I can see where the trouble might be. Linda?
I think that was, I heard a new term, or I was trying to, maybe it makes sense of the word consequences. You said you would use number 3 if potentially, if you can't think of an unwanted consequence of how they're thinking.
Yeah, number 2 is an unwanted consequence of what they're thinking, if you think about it, right? They just said that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily is a fish. They just said that. Well, an unwanted consequence of that would be that we'd have to say that coral are fish. We don't want to say that. Coral aren't fish.
Okay, thanks.
You see? Like we'd also have to say that like seaweed are fish. We also don't want to say that seaweed aren't fish, right? So that's an unwanted consequence. Now, unwanted consequence, I don't want you to think that that's like a term of art. It's not like a term in Tibetan debate or something like that. It's just a way to explain what's happening here, right? Okay, so I have these 3 options. Now I'm going to choose one, and I'm going to choose the second one, just like Clara kind of suggested. So what I'm going to say to them is, the subject coral, it follows that they are fish because they live in the ocean. You have accepted the pervasion, right? The pervasion being that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily is a fish. Oops, that is not what I meant to do. This is what I meant to do. Okay. So this is what I just said to them. So now what are their options, right? Their option, they have 3 options and only 3, right? Because I gave them a consequence with a reason. So they could either say, I accept. If they say that, what are they accepting? They're accepting that coral live in the ocean, right? They're accepting that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily is a fish, but they've already accepted that, so I'm not including that as a new thing. And they're accepting that coral are fish, right? If I say take the subject coral, it follows that they are fish because they live in the ocean. If they say I accept, they're accepting all of this. The other thing I can say, the other thing they can say is the reason is not established, which would mean coral do not live in the ocean, right? And the other thing that they can say is there is no pervasion, meaning it is not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. Now, if they say that, they'll be contradicting what they had just said, right? But they can say that. Let's say they do say that. Like, let's say they kind of think about it and are like, oh, yeah, you're right. It's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. So then they'd say there is no pervasion, right? So they've just implicitly posited that it is not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. They haven't accepted, they haven't said it. All they said is there is no pervasion, right? So they've implicitly posited that. So I need to make them explicitly accept this for the record. So I'm going to say, it follows that it is not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish, right? I'm saying out loud what they just implicitly accepted. And logically, they're going to say, I accept, because I'm just saying out loud what they just said, you know? Again, if they're like, oh, wait, I didn't mean to say that, then okay, fine. But otherwise, this is what they're saying. Now, notice, oh, sorry, this is just highlighting like why it is that logically they're saying this, because I'm just saying out loud what they implicitly accepted. Now they've just explicitly accepted that it is not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish, right? So now they've contradicted themselves because they've accepted that whatever lives in the ocean is not necessarily a fish, but they've also posited that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily are fish, right? So because they've contradicted themselves, I clap my hand backwards and I say tsa. Backwards, I didn't know how else to say it, but like, you know, instead of just clapping palm to palm, I clap like back to palm. And I'd say tsa, right? It means finished, meaning like that mistake is finished, that position is finished, right? So I say tsa. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So I say tsa, So now I just want to point out, like I'm crossing out, like they're no longer saying this. They're no longer saying that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily are fish. That's gone, right? And instead what they are saying is that it is not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish, right? They've just accepted that. So that's where the scoreboard stands, so to speak. So their root thesis is the subject whales, they are fish, but they've also accepted the subject whales, they live in the ocean, but they've also accepted it is not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. Right? So what am I thinking now? So I'm thinking, well, okay, the defender no longer thinks that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. So they can't anymore, they can no longer use they live in the ocean as a reason to prove that something is a fish. So they can no longer use they live in the ocean as a reason to prove that whales are fish. That reason doesn't fly. They might have other reasons, but that reason doesn't fly anymore based on what they currently believe. Since they live in the ocean was their original reason given for why whales are fish, and since they don't believe that reason anymore, then for all I know, maybe they don't think that whales are fish anymore. Right? I don't know what they currently believe about that, because they're not just allowed to, because of given debate, they're not just allowed to say, oh, you know what, in that case, I also think that blah, 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 blah. All I know is that they don't believe that anymore, right? So therefore, for all I know, they don't, they already see that whales are not fish. So let me check, right? So to sum all of this up, what I'm thinking is, let me check whether they still think that whales are fish in light of new developments. So what are my options, right? So my first option is to say, take the subject whales, it follows that they are fish. My second option is to say, take the subject whales, it follows that they are not fish. Now, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to ascertain, do they think that whales are fish, right? So to do that, I can either say, follows that whales are fish, it follows that whales are not fish, and see which way they go. You guys with me? Okay.
Sorry, do you say either or
I
both?
can say I can choose either one of these.
Okay.
Right? Like it doesn't really matter at this point. It's just a stylistic choice at this point, because they're obviously not equivalent sentences, but if they would say yes to the first, they would say no to the second. In fact, if they say yes to the second, they would say no to the first. So it doesn't matter how I get there. I have to say one of them to see what they're going to say. Right? So let's say that I say, take the subject whales, it follows that they are not fish. I'm just changing things up a little. Okay. So now that's what I've said. Take the subject whales, it follows that they are not fish. So they have two options. Anytime I give a simple consequence without a reason, they have two options. They can either say I accept, or they can say why. Right? So let's say this time they say why. So what they're implicitly accepting is that the subject whales, they are fish. I said they're not fish. I said why? So they're implicitly accepting that they are fish, right? For the sake of the debate, remember, for the sake of the debate. Like in other words, they're accepting that their working hypothesis is that they are fish. In this case, this means that they have just reaffirmed their root thesis once again. Like I was checking, do they still believe their root thesis, yes or no? And they've just kind of confirmed, yes, they still believe it. Subject whales, they are fish. So what are my options? As always, I'm sorry. They've just implicitly accepted this, right? Implicitly accepted this. So one option I have is to make them explicitly accept this implication. And the other option I have is to give them a reason to prove that whales are not fish. Oh, and that's as far as I got. Okay, we'll go back to this in just a moment. But yes, Brett.
Is it also an option to have them supply a reason at this point?
No, only because that's a good question. only because they haven't explicitly accepted that yet. There's nothing for them to supply a reason for, right? The reason I could supply them a reason is because they have asked why.
Another comment I had, I'm curious why you chose this, because I remember learning, I think last year, that fish are no longer a taxonomic category.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I did not even know that. Why did I choose this? Because it's the first thing that came into my head when I was trying really quickly to scramble to put something together. I didn't want to go into tomatoes and like I thought tomatoes, vegetables. No, we've done that too many times. You know, I thought Snoopy, that's old now. And then I thought impermanent. No, that's going to bring up too many questions. So it's just like whales, fish. It doesn't matter if we all think that they are, if some of us think that they're not, like, it doesn't really matter. The point is just to illustrate the process. And whales and fish are both easy words to say out loud. Clara?
I'm just trying to remember the second option of the first round, as it were.
Okay. So
I think they had accepted the reason, but I can't exactly remember.
So here's what I think, if you guys are willing, let's do. Let's go through this twice more, if you guys are willing. One time, let's go through it quickly, and I won't even take any questions, okay? And then the second time, let's go through it quite slowly, and then we can address questions at each point. Does that seem fair? Okay. Let's see. Wait, let me stop sharing for a second so I can kind of get it. Where did it go? Something so weird is happening with my monitor right now, and I have no idea why. Okay. Play from start. Oh. How's that? Can you guys see that? Can you see that? Oh no, you can't. Oh, okay. Okay. Then that means that I can't share a PowerPoint in presentation view for some reason. Let me try one other thing, and then if not, I have yet one more idea. Do you guys see that? You see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me see if I can move you. Yeah, fantastic. Okay. So stage one, we want to establish the root thesis. And again, we're not gonna do any questions this round. Then we'll go through and we'll do questions. Stage one, establish the root thesis. So what I want to find out, does the defender believe that whales are fish? So my options are to either say, take the subject whales, it follows that they are fish, or say, take the subject whales, it follows that they are not fish. It doesn't matter which way I go. So I'm gonna pick one. I'm gonna say, take the subject whales, it follows that they are fish. So that's what I've just said. So now the defender's options are, defender's options are to say, I accept, or to say why, because I just gave them a reason without a consequence without a reason. Let's say that they say, I accept. What they just accepted is that the subject whales, they are fish. So that's my root thesis. That's their root thesis, rather. The subject whales, they are fish. This debate will end when they accept that whales are not fish, or when I give up for any reason. So now we go into stage two. Now we have our root thesis. We're going to debate the root thesis. We just accepted that whales are fish. I'm thinking whales are not fish. But hold on, though. What makes me say that? How do I know? Well, because I know they're mammals, right? So I'm thinking whales are not fish because they're mammals. That's my belief. That's my thought. So my options are to say to them, the subject whales, it follows that they are not fish because they are mammals. Or to say to them, the subject whales, it follows that they're not mammals then because they are fish. Or, and I would say you have accepted the reason. because they've accepted that whales are fish. Or to say to them, the subject whales, they're fish because I'm trying to understand why they think this, right? These are my three options. Let's say I go with this last one. The subject whales, they are fish because. Now, they don't have an option. They have to give me a reason. So let's say they say because they live in the ocean. So they've just they've implied that whales live in the ocean, and they've implied that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily is a fish. So they've implied this. So I want to make them explicitly accept it so that we're clear on the record that that's what's been said. So I say the subject whales, it follows that they live in the ocean, right? They've implied this already. So I just want to get them to accept. So they accept. So now I can put this on my tally of things they've accepted. And then I say, and it follows that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily is a fish. They've already implied this also. So again, now I want to make sure that they accept it. I accept, so I can put that in my list also of things they've accepted, right? So they've accepted these two things. So now what I'm thinking is, okay, they've accepted that whales live in the ocean, but that's true. It's true that whales live in the ocean. But they've also accepted that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish, but that's not true. It's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. That's what I'm thinking. But hold on though, what makes me say that? How do I know? Like, how do I know that whatever lives in the ocean it's not necessarily true that it's a fish? Well, what came to my mind first was coral. Like, well, coral lives in the ocean and it's not a fish, right? So really, I guess what I'm saying to myself is that it's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish because coral lives in the ocean and it's not a fish. Okay, that's just highlighting where they stand and where I stand. That's all, right? So now I have a few options. I can either say to them, it follows that it is not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish because coral lives in the ocean and it's not a fish, right? I can just tell them that, like, I can give them my own reasoning and say out loud to them what I'm thinking in my own head. Or I could show them a consequence that flows from what they're saying and say, the subject coral, it follows that they are fish because they live in the ocean, right? Now, this is implying that coral lives in the ocean. That's establishing the reason. And the pervasion would be that whatever lives in the ocean is fish, and they've accepted that. You've accepted the pervasion, right? So I would say that to them, you have accepted the pervasion. The other option I have is to ask them, why is it that you think that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish? So like whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish because, right? And then I'd elicit from them an answer. These are my options. So let's say I go with this, the subject coral, it follows that they are fish because they live in the ocean, right? So I'm giving them this absurd consequence. So that's what I said. Now they have the following options as always. They can accept, right? Now, if they accept that, they mean that they agree that coral live in the ocean and that they agree that coral are fish. They could say the reason is not established, which would mean that they're saying that coral do not live in the ocean. Or they could say there is no pervasion, which would mean that they're saying that it's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. So let's say they say that there is no pervasion, like I can't very well deny the coral live in the ocean, and I can't very well deny the coral are not a fish. So I guess there's no pervasion, right? So if they say there's no pervasion, implicitly what they're saying is it's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. So they're saying that implicitly. So now I want to make them say it explicitly, accept it explicitly for the record. So I'm going to say, it follows that it is not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. And they're going to say, yeah, that's what I mean. I accept, right? Again, I accept just means that they're out loud accepting what they just implied implicitly. So now they've just explicitly accepted that it's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish, which means that they've contradicted themselves because they're accepting that it's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish, but earlier they said that whatever lives in the ocean necessarily are fish. So I clap my hand backwards and I say tsa. And I cross that out, like that's not in question anymore. They no longer think that. Instead, what they accept is that it's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish, right? So if they've just explicitly accepted that it's not true that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. So what I'm thinking is, okay, they no longer think that whatever lives in the ocean is necessarily a fish. So they can no longer use they live in the ocean as a reason to prove that something is a fish. So they can no longer use they live in the ocean as a reason to prove that whales are fish. Since they live in the ocean was their original reason given for why whales are fish, and since they don't believe that reason is valid anymore, then for all I know, maybe they don't think that whales are fish anymore. So let me check. Right, in summary, let me check whether they still think that whales are fish. So how can I check whether somebody in debate, how can I check whether somebody thinks that whales are fish? I can either say take the subject whales, it follows that they are fish, or I can say take the subject whales, it follows that they are not fish. Right? So I'm going to choose one. Let's say I say take the subject whales, it follows that they are not fish. So now their options are to say I accept or why. Right? Because I gave them a consequence without a reason. So those are their only options. I accept, why? Let's say they say why. So now they've just implicitly accepted that the subject whales are fish. Because when I said they're not fish, they said why? Okay, so then you have to accept that they are fish if I want you to, right? All this means is that they're sticking to their root thesis implicitly here. So what are my options? My options is to just make it explicit and just say the subject whales, it follows that they are fish and make them say, I accept, or because they asked me why, I said the whales are not fish. They said why. My other option is to give them a reason to prove that whales are not fish. I can do that too. Okay. Now, I thought about this briefly when I was setting out to do this, but it's now that I read through it very quickly, it's more apparent to me that there's a pro, I hope, and a con to laying it out as a PowerPoint like this. The pro, hopefully, is that you'll get to see how the wheels turn in the mind when we're debating and what kind of determines the flow of debate. The con is that it makes it seem extremely complicated. Maybe. No. Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay. For some of us, yes. For some of us, no. For those of us that yes, then just bear in mind that it's like if I asked you to do a PowerPoint of how do you drive a car, to somebody who's never driven a car before. So you'd say, you'd have to have all sorts of things or you'd say look in the side mirror. If you see a car, but it's more than this distance away, then make sure you don't bear left, but you could still perhaps bear right. Now, so look in the other mirror and it's going to sound like a mess, but all of this happens intuitively, instinctively, when you get the sense of what's happening. Okay. So I don't want you to think that you're going to have to be going over wait, what's this? It's going to come. Okay. Let me pause there for another moment. Here. Before we go through it in detail, any questions overall? Andrew?
Yeah. Would you have, and again, I'm going to regret this because I'm going to show my ignorance for posterity on the internet.
Yes. We are pioneers.
I would have answered that yes, a whale is a fish, but would you have, and so far having gone through that, there's nothing that you would have said that would have convinced me otherwise. So would you normally have started off by saying, well, actually, what is that? Would we have started with definitions, or would we have agreed beforehand we're gonna debate on fish and mammals, therefore go and do your swatting before we have our debate?
We could, and I don't think we have to, because I, as the challenger, at any point, I can still say so hold on, what's the definition of fish here? How are you defining fish? So I could still get it from you at some point, because remember, even if you don't know the dictionary definition of fish, what matters to us is there's some reason that you believe that whales are fish. You know, it's if I ask you, are whales fish? And you say yes, you didn't have to go to the dictionary first. So you have some working definition of what you mean by fish. You know, like by definition, all we mean is like, well, according to you, what makes something a fish? Like how, according to you, how can you tell whether something is a fish? So I could always ask you like that, you know, like, well, according to you, you know, how can you tell if something's a fish? Meaning, what is the definition of fish, right? Now, one thing I want to point out too is, so far, I haven't said anything that would suggest to you that whales are not fish, but that's because, I mean, I don't want to say that's because, but I want to say like one thing to bear in mind in terms of that is that when I asked the defender to posit, why do they think that whales are fish? They posited that because they live in the ocean, which you wouldn't have posited. So I was debating something that was moot to you, like you already know that. Right? So if I had asked you, why is it that whales are fish, you would have said something different. And so the debate would have been more meaningful to you. So I just wanted to point that out just so that it doesn't seem like it always starts with us going around in circles fruitlessly. You know, this is just an example based on an incorrect reason that somebody gave. Does that make sense? Isla?
So there's two things I'm thinking with this specific one. With this, in my mind, you have to go down biology, because to me, that's the only way you'd be able to prove why whales aren't fish, by using biology. If you take definition, I don't know if the definition becomes the biology, whether they're separate, but say I have a definition of what a tree is and you have a definition of what a tree is, and you're convinced your definition's right. Even if I give you my definition, you're not going to agree. So even with definitions, you know, if you're adamant, like, you know, so even with definitions, sometimes I wonder, how is that going to work? And then how would you actually prove this? Is it the biology, which is going to be different from the definition? Just like your thoughts on this one.
Yeah. That's a really good question. It's interesting. Like, I think a lot hinges on that question. I think we kind of keep coming back around to that question. So let me try to say it this way. Suppose you and I disagree on the definition, okay? Either one of us is right and the other one is wrong, or, well, for the sake of, there's a third logical possibility, but for the sake of simplicity, either one of us is right and the other one is wrong, or definitions don't work that way. Like a definition isn't something that could be right or wrong, right? If one of us is right and the other one of us is wrong, there should be a way for the one of us who's right to prove to the other one that they're wrong, right? So then definitions would be no different than anything else. I could prove to you that your definition is wrong, just like I could prove to you anything else. But you're probably having the intuition that, well, you couldn't really prove to me that my definition is wrong, right? And if you have that intuition, it's because you're implicit in that is that definitions don't work that way. Definitions are purely matters of convention. A word is just a collection of sounds, and we can use that to describe whatever we want, right? In which case, it's no longer about establishing which definition is correct. It's about making sure that I can get you to debate about what it is that I'm trying to get you to debate about. So if you think that fish means a feathered animal that flies, that's not what I had in mind. I had in mind like a scaly animal that swims in the ocean, let's say. So when I see that that's not what you mean by fish, now I'd say, okay, take the subject fish. It follows that it is not the definiendum of a scaly animal that lives in the ocean. And say, yeah, it's not. Okay, say, okay, then take this subject, a scaly animal that swims in the ocean. It follows that you would give some other word for it. Yeah, pause it. Now you give me the word that you have, you know, Pisces, you know, oh, a scaly animal lives in the ocean, Pisces. Okay, then take the subject a whale. It follows that a whale is a Pisces. Because now we're debating about what I really mean. It doesn't matter what we call it. Right? I have one more thing to say about that, though, which is that even though definitions are matters of convention, so, okay, let me actually say a couple of things. Matters of convention, convention, it can is something that exists within a certain group of people, right? Internationally, we have a convention of how long a meter is, right? Well, right? But like what establishes that is the fact that we as a group, who's we in this case? I don't know. It's hard to say exactly who we is, but some of us as a group have agreed, okay, a meter is however far light travels in this span of time, I think is the definition, right? It's not that we could have gotten that wrong. It's not like the first person to establish the meter could have made a mistake, and it turns out that unbeknownst to all of us, a meter is actually much bigger. Like it only exists as established by convention, by definition, right? So we as a group agree that a meter. So that's an example of a convention where the group that shares the convention is very wide. But there could be a convention where the group that shares the convention is very small. Like if you, with your family or significant other, if you have like your own cute little terms for things, you know, like, I'm trying to think of an example that isn't too cutesy wootsy from me and my husband. Like, I don't know here. Okay, this is embarrassing enough. And it's also going to be on the internet, but whatever. But my husband's favorite animal is the sea otter. And for some reason, I don't remember how, like years and years ago, we started referring to them as loisters. I don't know. I do not know. So take the subject loister. What is the definition of it? Well, in this household, the convention is it's a sea otter, right? So that's our established convention. But that's a convention of two people, you know, and well, now the internet knows, but whatever. It's a convention that exists only between two people. You see what I mean? So if we're talking about loisters, as long as we're using the same convention, we're fine. Right? Nobody can say like, no, you got it wrong. That's not what a loister is, you know? Now, this is the last thing I wanted to say, and then I want to hear your follow-up. If it's established that you and I are trying to talk about what other people mean by this word, then there is a fact of the matter. And then there has to be a way for us to find out. So for example, take the subject impermanent. It follows that it means something that doesn't last a second moment. You say that to a good look person, they'll say, I accept. You say that to an enigma person, they'll say, why? Because they define impermanent differently, right? You're never going to prove one or the other because it's just a matter of convention. However, if you see what you can do is you can say, take the subject impermanent. It follows that when the Gelugpas use it, they mean lasting no more than a moment. That is true. That is not a matter of like that is the case. Gelugpas use it to mean that, and that you can prove. And the way you'd prove that is by going to the Gelugpa test and saying, see, or asking a Gelugpa Geshe and saying, see. But what you're proving there is not that impermanent really means this. What you're proving there is that this is how Gelugpas use that word. Okay, Isla.
Gosh, there's three things. It's so hard to hold in your mind, to listen and hold in your mind what your response to all the different. No, it's me. I'm practicing at it. It's yeah. Okay, so the first thing is my husband, if it makes you feel any better, my husband really likes cutesy things. And so he doesn't call me by my name. And so it's like, it's a mama bear and a daddy bear. And that's just the thing. And it's really silly. So, you know,
it's adorable.
Because that's what he calls me. We've been in the supermarket and he stood at one end of the checkout and I've been about 10 feet away at the other end. And that's the word he shouted across. And the checkout person and everyone has gone. Which I thought
Yes.
was hilarious because it doesn't bother me,
That's
but that would
adorable.
mortify someone. And he didn't even realize he'd
We all
done it.
have that, right? We all have those. We all have our own household conventions.
It was really funny, and
That's
until I'd
adorable.
explained to him, he'd no idea what he'd done. And I said, "You realize what you've just done, by the way?" Anyway, yeah, the definition in response to that, yes, I think that's the big thing, because everybody has got the different ideas. And so I was trying to have a conversation with a friend of mine about desire, and that desire's bad. And this is so complicated because, again, what do you mean by desire? And at one point he's coming back, because I was trying to explain actions and life choices I'd made, basically, because he didn't understand. And so for me, I've got to do certain things or not do certain things, because then I throw myself into situations which provoke desire, which is going to be bad, because then you don't have control. I mean, you know the whole story. So long story short, and so his response then was, all right, but then, you know, there's no feelings, it's not being human, it's not. And I says, no, I didn't say for 1 second that joy and compassion and patience and bliss and happiness or any of those things are bad. I didn't say that, but he'd implied that, you see.
Yes.
Because of his definition, and of course without picking into it, but he didn't want to pick into it. I mean, he started the conversation, but I had to drop it because he just gets lost, because he makes all these assumptions and we're on 2 different pages with our definitions. So I think the follow through of that, if I'm understanding right, then is with the consequences and the absurdities, because then that's how, and so that's quite an important thing there, to try and prove, well, this definition is absurd, because if I just tell you it's absurd, it won't mean anything to you. Whereas if I can kind of show how it's absurd.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yes. So because sometimes it will be very clear to you, let's say, and again, I keep saying you as the challenger just for now, but like sometimes it's very clear to you that the definition that the person just gave isn't really what they mean. Like that they wouldn't, or even if they mean it, like that they just haven't thought it all through yet. You know, like for example, if I said, okay, fish, but what's the definition of fish? The person says lives in the water. I would say, I don't think that's what you mean, right? So I would say, okay, take the subject seaweed. It follows that it's a fish because it lives in the water. And I'm giving the person to say like, oh, okay, actually come to think of it, that's not the definition of fish, you know? But if they want to stick by it, you know, yes, fish means live in the water, then as long as they're willing to say, yes, seaweed are fish, that's fine. We're just using words differently at that point. But then by that logic, they can't say that all fish are animals, right? Like, again, they have to be coherent. They have to be consistent, right? But within that consistency, they can use whatever labels they want. But what's fascinating, though, is that like we ourselves are very often, very inconsistent within our own thoughts, you know? So for example, if I may just pick the example that you just gave of desire, because that's such like a relevant one and a prevalent one, relevant and prevalent. We might be told, okay, desire, well, let me put it this way. We might have one line of reasoning for why desire is to be given up, right? But then in another moment, we might think of something and say, okay, I guess that's desire, so I should give that up. But we're using 2 different definitions of desire within our own mind in those 2 instances. And so we're giving something up. So for example, one common mistake that people often make when they approach Buddhism is that they say, well, you shouldn't want to be a Buddha because that's desire and you should give up desire, right? That's an example of somebody playing with 2 definitions, or at least not having understood the first thing, or something went wrong somewhere, right? So to that, you'd say, well, the subject desire, posit the definition of it. The person is wanting something. Okay, it follows that wanting something is something to be gotten rid of. I accept. Okay. follows that whatever is an instance of wanting something is necessarily something to be gotten rid of. I accept. Take the subject, wanting all sentient beings to be free from suffering. It follows that that's something to be gotten rid of because that's an instance of wanting something. You have accepted the pervasion. You know? And that way they'll realize that when whatever made them first notice that desires to be given up, that's not what it meant. It didn't just mean wanting something, it meant something else, right? And then our own practice can become stronger and stronger and clearer because it's not confused, if that makes sense. I mean, like a ridiculous example, right? A ridiculous example would be, take the subject, attachments. It follows that they are to be given up. I accept. Okay, let me even take it a step further. It follows that whatever is an attachment necessarily is to be given up. I accept. Okay. Take the subject, the couch. It follows that it is not to be vacuumed because there are to be no attachments to apply to the vacuum cleaner with which to vacuum it, right? Like, I mean, I skipped a bunch of steps there, but obviously that's not what we meant, right? Obviously that's not what we meant. That's a ridiculous example because attachments are such two different concepts in that case, but sometimes like desire and desire might be very similar concepts, and so it's not as obvious to us that we're equivocating that way.
But even then within that, it's the subtlety of it, isn't it? Because, and so this one's relevant for me, it's I'm really attached to not having mess everywhere and having order and tidiness because it just disturbs my mind having crap everywhere. Now I live with 3 very untidy people. So in my mind, it's like, you know, there's a line and then it becomes kind of balanced. So, I mean, you could argue, oh, well, you've got attachment to a really clean house, so you should live in filth because, you know, that's attachment to having that clean every week, you know,
right.
So don't do it. And it's like, well, no. So yeah,
exactly. So it's important to become very clear. What is the definition of attachment? Again, it's not like that there is like one correct definition or something, but like, what is the definition of attachment that is the definition used to show that attachment should be given up? You know, if we define attachment as wanting something, you can't prove that it should be given up. If you define attachment as the vacuum cleaner thing, you can't prove that it should be given up. But if you define it, there is a definition of attachment such that well, yes, if that's what we're talking about, that needs to be given up. And so we need to figure out what is that? What are we referring to when we say attachment is the source of suffering, attachment is to be given up, right? Clara?
Keep forgetting what I want to say.
Lauren?
I think it's the going back to the mammal and fish example, and the sort of thinking through the 3 options again, because I do feel like the one that really goes to the heart of the matter is the second one, because that's really about highlighting to the other person that they've accepted the reason or the pervasion, right? Rather than giving them a counterexample, as in the first option,
Right.
or asking them to elaborate, basically, as in the third option, which gives away the power to them, or where the debate is going.
Yes.
Because if one goes to the second one kind of cuts to the chase.
Yes.
But I was thinking about the whole fish and mammal situation, because and it depends on, you know, whether one knows or has an idea about what the person might be, where the person is going wrong. But it seems to me that maybe they don't know it's a mammal. And so how do you, if you'd chosen that option and they, you know, if I remember correctly, the defender would have said, so take the subject, the whale, it follows that it's not a mammal because it's a fish. And they would, if that's what they thought, they're most likely to say, I accept.
Yes,
And how does
exactly.
one then prove
So,
it
right,
to them?
so
Because
then
if they
let's
don't know what a, you know, that what
exactly. So let's think about it. So let's say I said, like you said, the subject, a whale, it follows that it is a fish. It follows that it is not a mammal because it is a fish. It says, I accept. So they're accepting that a whale is not a mammal, right? So what's going through my mind? Well, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, that's wrong, right? A whale is a mammal. So now I have to stop and think, well, how do I know? Right? And again, this is benefiting me too, right? Like I'm part of the debate as well. I keep saying, like, how do I know that a whale is a mammal? Well, because they drink milk when they're young, is my first thought, right? So what I would say is, if I like, I'll just keep taking that same approach. Okay, so then I would say to the subject, a whale, it follows that it does not drink milk when it's young because it's not a mammal. Right? Again, I'm giving them another absurd consequence from my point of view. Now, they believe that whales don't drink milk when they're young. So they'll say, I accept. So they're accepting that whales don't drink milk when they're young. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, that's wrong, right? How do I know that that's wrong? And now I find myself, me, Gus, I find myself in a bit of a bind because how do I know that whales drink milk when they're young? I've been told, but I don't know, so I'm learning something here too. I'm learning where I don't have clarity about things. You see what I mean? So either I'll think about it and figure out like, no, here's the evidence I have for why whales drink milk, and then I'll continue the debate from there. Or I'll say, you know what, I don't know, I can't keep taking that track, so I'll take a different route. I can always approach things from a completely different angle. I can go way back to the beginning as the challenger. As a challenger, I don't have to commit to staying on a given track. I can approach it from any angle. So they're saying whale or fish. So I might say something like, this is probably what I would do. I would say the subject fish follows that you can posit a definition of it. I accept. Posit. What's the definition of fish? Like, let's see, like, what's happening here, right? That's probably where I would go. My other option is to think, well, they've just said that whales don't drink milk when they're young. I believe they do, but I don't know how I know. So I need more time to think about this. So I might kind of, in theory, give up the debate and say, let's come back to this. That's a good question. Let's come back to this. You see? Now, if you're doing a formal debate, you wouldn't do that because you want to just keep, you want to use your time, basically. Like you have this much time to debate. So, okay, that line of inquiry, I'll have to think more about and come back to it. But meantime, what's the definition of fish? Like you would keep it going. But in principle, you could always stop. You could always say, I don't know. We'll stop there and we'll pick it up again. I'll look into it. I'll find out. And right. Because again, either there is a way to find out, in which case there's a way to prove it, or else there isn't a way to find out, in which case, why am I saying that they're wrong?
But it's difficult to prove it to someone who, I'm just because it's not a logical flaw. It's just a lack of knowledge that you can't convince someone of that in a debate.
So what you could do is, like, let's say that, like one line of attack you could take, is you could say, the subject, a whale, it follows that if you open up a biology textbook, you'll see that it says that it's not a mammal or whatever, like you could kind of like in the debate, you could kind of point your finger at the empirical evidence, right? Now, within the course of the debate, if the book isn't right there, you might not be able to prove that, but you'll have given them the finger pointing at the moon of how they can find out, right? And then if they look and they like, I mean, in this case, my understanding is that they'll find that you were right. But if they were to look and find that you were wrong, they can bring that to you. You see? Like this is like organizing our thinking so that we're not just kind of talking aimlessly left and right. Like if we end this by saying, okay, this is how we would find out if we care, that's a great win, I think. Right? Now, again, I just want to be transparent about this. That part of the answer that I just gave is my thinking, based on the application that we're using this for here. Like, our goal here is to figure out how to use this tool to learn things about the truth, like, period. Like, we have no further constraints. In that case, I'd stick with what I just said. But I just want to point out that traditionally in the monasteries and nunneries, when they're debating in the debate courtyard, the expectation is that whatever they'll be debating about is something that they'll have already studied and done the research on, and so they'll be coming in with that common ground already. If you have that, then it's easier. Like, you'll never be left with, I don't know, I have to look it up. So they memorize everything. Like, that's the first step. They memorize definitions, they memorize divisions, they memorize examples, they memorize everything. And then once they have that memorized, then they come and debate to understand it, like, for real. Yeah. And so on the debate courtyard, like, if you ask basically a question and the person just doesn't know, and they're like, well, I know it said it in the text, but I don't even remember where, or something like that, then the thing you say is like, oh, you have your knowledge in a box then. And it's not like a formal debate term, but like, you have your knowledge like packed away in a suitcase somewhere. That's no use. Like, you need to have it in the forefront of your mind, But if we're engaging in a debate where things kind of go in a different, so like, for example, a few years back, like, I kind of taught my dad the very basics of this, and we were having a debate, and trying to remember, I don't remember how we got to this. I don't remember, but somehow or other, something hinged on whether the skeleton of a bird transforms into a mineral. What on earth were we debating? I don't know. And we got stumped because we didn't really know what the definition of a mineral was, and we were just kind of, both of us, like, we were kind of like lost, and we're like, well, I don't know, is coal a mineral? I mean, it grows in the ground, not grows, but like, you kind of, there are ores and you kind of mine it. And so, like, again, because this wasn't like a formal debate where, like, we had an amount of time and we wanted to use it, said, okay, let's stop here, let's look up what a mineral is, and then we'll continue. It turns out that according to the dictionary that we consulted, there are two different definitions of mineral. That's why we were confused. A mineral can either mean like an ore that you mine from the ground, or it can mean the other thing, whatever it was, like a non-organic, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, so where does that leave us, by the way? It leaves us that we can either pick one of those definitions and then debate about that, or we can say, let us define a mineral as either of the two, A or B, right? In which case it's like a broader concept. Isla?
Thinking about what you said there in relation to what Clara said, you spoke of truth. So if truth removes wrong view, so wrong view can't stand in the presence of a truth, point blank, then it's then to do with truth. So for the mammal, so the whale being the mammal, so my response is going to be, well, a whale is a mammal. I mean, you can go both ways. A whale is a mammal because it has to breathe air, and so it holds its breath underwater. but it has to come up for air, and that's why you see them coming up, so you can prove it because they're coming up for air. Whereas a fish has gills, and so that's how it takes oxygen in through the water, through the gills, and it processes it through the water. So fish don't have to come up for air. But then even saying that, it does depend on the other person's ability to rationalize and to even see truth. And maybe this comes down to karma then, because if I say to someone, okay, so a whale is a mammal because it needs to breathe air, and they come up for air and you can prove it. But they go, yeah, that's not why it comes up for air. It comes up for air because it wants to see the sun. Then you're still, even then, you're still stuck. So maybe then it's a case of, because the other person maybe doesn't want to accept it. So it depends, I guess, on both parties having an open mind. And it's maybe, yes, use truth, and truth is the ultimate way, truth and consequence, I put it. But it's kind of, going as far as you can go, maybe. And there will be some cases where somebody's like, well, absolutely, it doesn't matter what you say, maybe. Right. I don't know how that works in the courtyard.
Yeah. So somewhere in the book that we had started, Daniel Perdue's book, he talks about how to choose a debate partner, like which is another way of saying like how to choose whether or not to debate with somebody. And he points that out. He points out that it's not really helpful to debate with somebody who just doesn't want to know. Like, he calls them card carriers. Like they've just made up their mind, and it doesn't matter what you have to say. They just don't want to know, So he says, you don't need to debate with them, and that sure comes down to karma for sure. Now, in some cases, you can leave them with a consequence, and sometimes you're planting a seed that will germinate later. Like in the moment, like, this is more of a pragmatical question rather than a logical question. It's like more about human psychology. Like sometimes, like you might say, like, take the subject away, it's a man because it comes up for air. That person, maybe it does not come up for air, like they might say that, but maybe over time, like, like that will kind of germinate and they'll kind of come around, maybe, that's a very complicated pragmatic question that there's not like a blanket statement answer for, like, should you leave them with a consequence? Should you not? You have to use your best judgment. But I agree with you that it's fruitless to debate back and forth if the person just isn't open to learning. Now, if, however, the person is being intellectually honest, like as mistaken as they may be, if they really think, like, for all I know, I guess maybe a whale does come up to see the sun, then it behooves us to think, like, well, how do I know that they're wrong? See what I mean? But if they're just saying words, then they're just saying words. Then you don't need to worry. Let me give you guys 3 options. One option is we can go through the slides again slowly, and you can let me know at any point where you have questions. Another option is we can take 20 minutes to let you guys practice in breakout rooms. And another option is if somebody wants to volunteer, we can do like a live demonstration of a debate, but without interruptions. So who votes for option 1, the slides? Raise your hands. Who votes for option 2, breakout rooms? Who votes for option 3, demonstration? Oh, okay. All right. Shows how much I know. I thought you guys wanted number 2. So, okay. So I'm glad I asked. Well, so some of us did, but okay. So for this, we need Andrew, are you volunteering?
No, I'm not volunteering, definitely not. I just had a quick question though about the back to the start to the fish and whales. So what, and this happened a couple of times with Jana and I during the week when we were practicing. It's like you do the first one and the person goes, yeah, I accept, and you go, okay, we both agree. Like,
yes.
So therefore, what's kind of like, where do you go from there? Is there anything?
That's a great question. So there's 2 options there. One option is to say, like, oh, okay, then let's debate something else, right? And that's totally fair, because, yeah, anyway, the other option is to is to play devil's advocate and make sure that they really get what they're saying. You know, so for example, I believe that whales are mammals, right? That I don't mean believe as a matter of faith. I mean, like, that's my current understanding. So let's say I said, somebody take the subject of whale, false that it's a mammal. They said, I accept, right? So now what is my thinking? My thinking is like, okay, I agree with them, but to help them out as a debater, like, what types of things might throw people off and make them think that whales are not mammals? I mean, my first thought is like, well, they live in the sea like a fish, you know? So I might say, take the subject, whales, it follows that they are not mammals because they are fish, you know? The person might say, the reason is not established, right? They'd say, take the subject, whales, it follows that they are fish because they are animals that live in the ocean. You see what I'm doing? It's like, I'm trying to think like, where would I go wrong if I were going wrong about this? If I thought that whales weren't mammals, why wouldn't I think that whales are mammals? And I'm arguing from that point of view. And that's not, that can be helpful for a number of reasons. One is, the central reason is that will kind of make the person, because very often we believe the right thing out of luck, you know? So this will prevent that. And the other thing is that along the way, the person might say something else that's mistaken that you can help them correct. It's not about the central point, you know, but like, for example, if they accept that whales are mammals, another thing, so take the subject, whales, it follows that they are mammals. The person says, I accept. So I'm going to go, okay, well, I agree, right? But let me make sure that they get what they're saying. So I might say, the subject, whales, they are mammals because, you know, and the person might say, they are mammals because they, I don't know, because they only have, they're mammals because they have a fins, right? They might say that, right? Well, now we're getting somewhere, because that I don't agree with. That is not a good reason, because they're implying that whales have fins. I agree with that. They're implying that whatever has fins necessarily is a mammal. I don't agree with that, right? Well, why don't I agree with that? Well, because salmon have fins and salmon aren't mammals. So I would say, take the subject of salmon. It follows that it is a mammal because it has fins. I skipped a step. I forgot. I would want them to spell it. Sorry. Okay. Whales are mammals. Why? Right? Because they have fins. Okay. It follows that take the subject whale. It follows that it has fins. I accept. It follows that whatever has fins necessarily is a mammal. I accept. Take the subject of salmon. It follows that it is a mammal because it has fins. You have accepted the pervasion. You see? So now, and so then they might kind of, at some point they might go like, okay, wait, so having fins doesn't prove that something is a mammal. What does prove that something is a mammal then? And so I'm helping them that way, you see? It's kind of nice in a way that as the challenger, you have the freedom to go anywhere and say anything, you know, because that lets you, again, no pun intended, that lets you fish, you know, like for where, like, what's the weak link here that I can help them strengthen? You know, like, why do you think that whales are mammals? Okay. Like, how are you defining mammal? Okay. Then but aren't they fish because they live in the sea? Okay, you know, and if you don't find any flaw, then the gods are victorious. But if you find some chink in the armor, then you have to help them see that so that they can patch it up. You were probably, sorry, I didn't see. Could you email the PowerPoint you went through today? Yes, I'll be happy to, yes. So, okay. So let's run through something together here. Who's a brave volunteer?
As a challenger or defender?
As a defender. Does anybody want to volunteer to be a challenger? Okay, then as a defender. All right, Clara, thank you very much. So,
Could I ask, could we pick something that's like a Buddhist topic?
I was about to open my mouth and say, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to pick something that is a Buddhist topic. So very, very nice. Well, how about this? I reserve veto power, but is there like a topic within Buddhism that you find yourself like doubtful about or like confused about?
Whether the mind is inherently existent.
Ooh, okay. Let's do that. Whether the mind is inherently existent. Very good. Very good. Very good. Let me think about this for just 1 second. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna ask of everybody. For now, let's not interrupt it with questions. Let's see what happens if we let it flow. Okay. And Clara, you two, to the best of your ability, of course, only to the best of your ability, but to the best of your ability, see if you can limit yourself to just answering the questions that I'm going to be giving you, right? So, if I give you a simple consequence, then either I accept or why. If I give you a complete consequence with a reason, then either I accept, the reason is not established, or there is no pervasion. If you accept that something exists and I say pause it, right? Then just say the subject blank, right? And if I say, if you've accepted something, I say the subject blank, it is blank because, then just say because and a reason. Okay? All right. Okay. The subject, just as Manjushri debated. So take the subject, the mind. It follows that it is inherently existent.
Why?
Take the subject, the mind. It follows that it is not inherently existent.
I accept.
Take the subject, inherently existent. It follows that you can posit the definition.
I accept.
Posit.
The subject, the mind, no, inherent, how do I phrase it?
You just say the subject and then you say the definition.
The subject, the mind, is not inherently existent because it doesn't exist.
No, sorry. So we were saying, take the subject, inherent existence.
Oh.
It follows that you can posit the definition.
Accept.
Posit. So you're going to say the subject, and then you're just going to say what the definition is. The subject, blah. Just say the words, the subject.
The subject.
Now say what the definition of inherent existent is.
Does not exist from its own side. Or
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Take the subject, does not exist from its own side. It follows that it is the definition of inherent existent.
I accept.
Take the subject, the mind. It follows that it does not exist from its own side because it is not inherently existent. You've accepted the reason and you've accepted the pervasion.
I accept.
So I'm just going to repeat myself. Take the subject, the mind. It follows that it does not exist from its own side.
I accept.
The subject, the mind. It does not exist from its own side because
because it depends on conceptual designation.
The subject, the mind, it follows that it depends on conceptual designation.
I accept.
It follows that whatever depends on conceptual designation necessarily does not exist from its own side.
I accept.
You're making this hard for me. It's very good. Okay, so I parenthetically for everybody at home, like every answer that Clara has given is spot on. It's perfect. Okay. As far as I'm concerned. Okay. The subject, the mind. Okay. Take the subject, the mind of a snail. It follows that it is not labeled by conception. It's not conception. How did you phrase it? It's not.
It doesn't depend on conceptual designation.
Okay, take the subject, thank you. Take the subject, the mind of a snail. It follows that it depends on conceptual designation.
I accept.
Take the subject, the mind of a snail. It follows that there is some conceptual designation that it depends on.
I accept.
The subject, the mind of a snail, it follows that there is somebody who is conceptually designating that mind.
I accept.
Take the subject, the snail themselves, the snail. It follows that they are conceptually designating their mind.
Why?
Follows that they are not conceptually designating their mind.
I accept.
Take this subject, a snail that exists all by itself somewhere without anybody else near. It follows that it is not conceptually designating its own mind.
I accept.
It follows that nobody else is conceptually designating their mind because they live all by themselves.
I accept.
It follows that their mind does not exist because nobody is conceptually designating it. You have asserted the pervasion.
I accept.
The subject, a snail living all by itself somewhere, it follows that their mind does not exist.
I accept.
Okay. It follows the subject, the snail living all by itself somewhere, it follows that it is not a sentient being because it does not have a mind.
I want to say so. The reason is not established.
Okay. Take the subject, a snail. It follows that the snail living by itself. It follows that it does have a mind.
I accept.
The subject, the snail, it follows that its mind does exist.
I want to specify though. Can I like, no. Why?
It follows that its mind does exist because it has a mind. You have accepted the reason. That discomfort you're feeling, that discomfort you're feeling is logic happening. Honest, like the fact that you want to specify, right? The fact that you want to specify means that you've accepted something you really didn't mean to accept, the way I phrased it.
Yeah.
You assumed that I meant something, but really I meant something else. That's what's happening, I think.
I feel
Right?
like I want to specify what the term existent, because you say it doesn't exist, but I'm talking about inherent existence. So yes, it exists, but not inherently.
Right.
What I want to say, but
right. Okay. So in principle, we would have to get there, but I can't pretend I didn't hear what you said. So let's go with what you said. Okay. Take the subject, that snail by itself. It follows that its mind does not exist inherently.
I accept.
It follows that its mind does exist non-inherently.
I accept.
Its mind, well, hold on, let me think what I want to say. It follows that its mind does not exist non-inherently because it does not exist at all.
To get my head around the double negative now. Can you repeat it?
Sure. That snail, the subject, it follows that its mind does not exist non-inherently, which is what you said it does. You said it exists non-inherently. I'm saying it doesn't exist non-inherently because it doesn't exist whatsoever. It doesn't exist at all.
Why?
Its mind. It follows that its mind does not exist at all because nobody is labeling it conceptually.
There's no pervasion. No.
Aha, okay. Okay, it follows that if nobody is conceptually labeling something, right, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist at all.
I accept.
Mhm. Okay, I'm pretty sure there's a sign there somewhere, but I've lost track. So we'll carry on. Okay. So now I'm trying to remember where we started from that made us talk about the snail, because you had I wouldn't be saying this out loud, but I'm just thinking out loud here that you said that so for something to exist, it needs to be labeled conceptually. Okay, so it follows that it is not the case that for something to exist, it needs to depend on conceptual labeling.
Why?
It follows that something is not the sorry, no, it's not the case that for something to exist needs to be. It follows that whatever exists necessarily depends on conceptual labeling.
I accept.
The subject, that snail, it follows that its mind depends on conceptual labeling because it exists. You have asserted both the reason and the pervasion.
Yeah, I accept.
So just to restate it, the subject, that snail, it follows that its mind depends on conceptual labeling. That's what you're accepting, okay? It follows that there exists somebody, that the subject, that snail, it follows that there exists somebody who is conceptually labeling their mind because its mind exists dependent on conceptual labeling. You have accepted the reason.
Could you repeat that?
If the subject, that's snail, let me even say this. Take the subject, that's snail's mind. Let's just make it simpler. Take the subject, that snail over there, their mind. It follows that there is somebody who is conceptually labeling it because it exists in dependence upon conceptual labeling. You have accepted the reason.
I accept.
It follows that there isn't anybody who is conceptually labeling it because the snail is by itself and it's not labeling it.
Why?
Because one, the snail is by itself, and two, the snail is not conceptually labeling its mind. You have asserted the second part of the reason.
I accept.
So you accept that nobody is conceptually labeling its mind.
Why?
Okay. Let's stop there. We're right at time. Okay, first of all, I just want to say that was fantastic, Claire. That was just brilliant. Well done.
Hard, very hard.
Wow, well done. You did it.
And
You
I had
really
the
did
easy
it.
part. You had the hard part.
Well, it
Don't know what I would
depends,
have
right?
done.
I had the part, my current thinking about it is I had the part that's harder, that takes the longest to learn. But once you've learned it, it's not the hardest part. I think you had the hardest part. So questions, folks. Dinesh?
So we learned about 3 modes and 4 modes, isn't it? 3 joints and 4 joints.
I'm so sorry, I just couldn't hear you.
We learned about 3 joints, 4 joints. So in the debate, where exactly that part comes into? So because
Sure.
when you're doing it, I am not hearing this.
Right. So first of all, just to clarify for everybody, 3 joints, 4 joints, and so forth. is what in the book that we were reading, it's called 3 possibilities, 4 possibilities, and so on. So where that comes in is if I as the challenger could always ask the defender, how two things compare, you know, that could be the initial foray, that could be the thing that we're debating about from the ground up, right? Or it could be something that comes up along the way, you know? So for example, if which didn't happen, but if Clara had said, well, no, it's not the case that whatever exists is conceptually designated or conceptually labeled, then one thing I could say is the subject, the two, existing and conceptually labeled, how do they compare, right? And then that would have come in there, right? But it's not the case that every debate has to have that as part of it. The reason that Daniel Perdue teaches it first, I think, is because as I've now come to think, like he's writing this book for logicians in the West, for people who already are logicians, and so he wants to show like what types of things prove pervasion and what don't, so that when he teaches the syllogism, it makes sense and so forth. But that's the answer. Other questions? Sheila.
So when you're going through this whole process, you still like sort of keep your eye on the ball. Like that thesis is like always what you're kind of returning to. I mean, no matter how many turns and versions, you're always going back to the thesis.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, in this case, it was kind of moot because the root thesis that she accepted is one that I can't possibly challenge, you know. The root thesis was that the mind is not inherently existing, and I got nothing against, you know, like, how do I prove otherwise? I got nothing, but in principle, yes, in principle, that's what I'm trying to. I'm sorry, the subject Snoopy is wanting to leave this room. Oh. Sorry. Yes, so I'm trying to see if I can get her to second guess herself to think that the mind does inherently exist, right? Now, it's possible because I asked Clara if there's any, like, you know, outside of the debate, I asked Clara, like, is there any point in Buddhism that you have doubt about or that you want to clarify more and so forth? And she said, yeah, that the mind, you know, inherently exists, right? So it's possible that the way I approached it doesn't get to the heart of Clara's own qualms about that, right? So one thing I could do is before we even start debating is I could have asked, like, what are your qualms? I didn't want to put Clara on the spot, you know, but like I could have asked, like, what are your qualms about that? Like, what is it that makes you wonder? And then that could have given the debate a more helpful direction, right? Or another thing that we could have done is that I could have been the defender, you know, and I could have said, okay, I'm going to say that the mind does not inherently exist. Now you challenge that. And that way, I'll show you where your mistake lies, so to speak. You see what I mean?
Or the other alternative would have been for me to have actually said the opposite, that it is
Exactly.
inherent. I should have said that, because then
Yes, I didn't want to put you on the spot, but yes.
I should have said that.
That would probably have been more practically useful for you in real life in this case, but
yeah,
you debated it beautifully. Yeah. Isla, and then I know we're
I've got completely confused here.
Oh no.
What was the thesis? That mind doesn't inherently exist?
Mm-hmm.
And you were trying to posit that mind doesn't inherently exist?
I was trying to.
And what was Clara trying to do?
I was being the devil's advocate here, trying to like suggest arguments to make her doubt and think that maybe the mind does inherently exist. I was only doing that, of course, to help her understand very clearly why my arguments are wrong, right?
And Clara, sorry if you don't mind, your position was that the mind doesn't inherently exist.
Yes, but reflecting on it, I should have said the mind does inherently exist, because I know the arguments why it doesn't, but somehow there's still something for me that I struggle with. So there's something that holds on to that kind of chitta matra view of the mind
Got you.
is actually
Yeah, because I
primary.
got that, and I was trying to, and then that's where I got confused, because I thought, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
So
But
I
then-
should have, I should have said that.
That's the type of thing that we only figure out through practice, like we kind of, otherwise there would be like a list of rules 1,000,000 miles long that would be just arbitrary. Some of it we just have to see, like, oh, okay, when I want this I should say that, like that just comes with time. But Isla, just to also maybe hopefully clarify, the direction in which the debate ended up going was, I asked Clara, like, what's the definition of inherent existence, and she gave me a definition. And so what I was like, what you guys saw us doing was basically me trying to poke holes in that definition, right?
Can I just what I felt a few times during that is that when you presented a thesis or challenged my whatever I was saying, you used existent, and so I was, I felt like, well, I didn't say it doesn't exist at all, so I made that, I said inherently existent, and then you dropped the inherently existent and just said existent. So in a way, I found myself having to accept certain things that you said, which I wouldn't have, because I found myself quite limited in what I could say, because what I wanted to say is, well, I'm not talking about it not existing at all. I'm talking about it inherently existent.
Yes, three things, three thoughts. Number one is, in that case, what you can do is you can say super placid, peaceful and calm and relaxed, and just answer the nonsense that I'm saying correctly. Like, you don't have to worry, like, in principle, you don't have to worry that I'm misunderstanding you. You can just be like, I didn't say that. So what did you say? That the snail exists? Yes, it exists, but it doesn't exist because blah, 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 blah. No, that's not true, You can just answer what I'm saying. That's number one, just like on a pragmatic level. Number two is what you can do, like this is like a little informal, but you can do it, is you can say, like, I didn't want to even let you do that much this time, because I just wanted to stay to the format so that it could be very, streamlined. But in principle, you could say, like, I didn't say that, I said this. Like, you could just kind of whisper to me, as it were, like, like, no, I didn't say exist, I inherently exist. Just to save us time, you could say, like, you misheard me or something like that. You can do that. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
If you think that's what's happening, if you think that what's happening is like, oh, he missed the boat, like, because it could be that what's happening is I'm trying to confuse you, in which case you just stay calm and don't get confused, but if you think, like, that's not what I said, that's not what I meant, like, this is what I meant, you can informally do that. The third thing I want to say, and this third thing I could be dead wrong about, but I thought, and this is about this particular exchange we just had, I thought that, yes, we started with inherent existence, but then when I asked you to establish inherent existence, you said independent of the mind, blah, blah, blah. And I think I said it follows that whatever exists necessarily is labeled by the mind, blah, blah, blah. And I thought you accepted that. Again, I'm probably wrong, but for what it's worth, like, the only reason I'm saying this is not to say, like, I didn't make a mistake, like, I don't care. The reason I'm saying that is just to say it's possible that the root thesis could be about inherent existence, and yet on a certain branch we're debating about existence in general. I just want everybody to be aware that that's not unkosher, like, that's perfectly reasonable, because it might be getting at a point, So, for example, if somebody says the mind doesn't inherently exist, why? Because it doesn't exist independent of a conceptual label, right? Somebody says that, and we say, okay, it follows that whatever doesn't exist independent of a conceptual label necessarily doesn't inherently exist. I accept. Does anything inherently exist? No. So it follows that whatever exists necessarily doesn't exist inherently. I accept. So it follows that whatever exists necessarily is labeled conceptually. I accept. So now we're talking about whatever exists. You see, one thing has flowed into the other. And then we can come back the way we came and settle the point about, does the mind inherently exist?
Yeah, it was the conceptually designated. I think that was the point.
But in any case, I'm sorry that I put you in a spot where you're like, oh, but I'm kind of also glad because a side effect of that is that it lets us make these points about like what to do in those situations, you know. Okay. Well, I hope this was useful. I think we did a lot today. So as always, I strongly encourage you guys to practice with each other. If you can't practice with each other, practice with yourself on a piece of paper. Write down challenger says, defender says, challenger says, defender says, and see what comes up. But for now, let's end by dedicating the potentials that we created from this time together. And you can think whatever you're comfortable thinking, but one way that we can think is all the potentials that we created in our mind streams, which are certain to be the causes of future experiences for us. May they be the causes of experiences only that bring us more compassion, more loving kindness, that bring us bodhicitta, that bring us a clear understanding of all the laws of cause and effect, that bring us a clear understanding of how things ultimately exist and conventionally exist, so that we can become of the most possible benefit to all beings everywhere. And then if you feel a connection to Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or if you'd like to join for any reason, we're also welcome to think, may these potentials that we've created also ripen only in ways that set up the conditions for Lama Zopa Rinpoche to be able to manifest to help us again as quickly as possible, as perfectly as possible. May we all in this world be able to see and hear and learn directly from Lama Zopa Rinpoche again from his next incarnation. And then if you'd like, we can also close with the dedication that Lama Zopa Rinpoche himself always recommended, where we can say, due to the 3-time merits accumulated by myself, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and all universal sentient beings who definitely exist as dependent arisings, but who are completely empty of inherently existing. May I, who definitely exist as a dependent arising, but who am completely empty of inherent existence, quickly attain the state of perfect enlightenment, which definitely exists as a dependent arising, but which is completely empty of inherent existence. So that I, who definitely exist as a dependent arising, but who am completely empty of inherent existence, may quickly lead all universal sentient beings who definitely exist, but who are completely empty of inherent existence, to that perfectly enlightened state, which definitely exists, but which is completely empty of inherent existence. May I do that by myself alone, which definitely exists, but which is completely empty of inherent existence. Thank you so much. Sorry to keep you late. But I hope you have a great week. I'll see you next time. Right?
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Gus. Gus, do you know that Jana is organizing debate partners for us?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I just want to let you know, did you know that Jana has been matching us up with as debate
No.
partners so we can meet during the week.
That's
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah, she's
I'm
taken
so
that on and she's
glad.
really, yeah, it's really a great
That's
thing.
really great. I'm so glad. Well done. All right.
Thank
Take care,
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye.